Hi everyone, my name is Frede and today I'm going to be talking about the next 5 books I read in 2015. Why was I going to say 2015? It's 2018. Anyways, 2018. It's 2018. Actually, of those 5 books, only 3 are like actual full-length books. The other 2 are... One of them is actually just kind of a short story, but I have to count it as a book, which I will get into in a bit. And the other one is kind of a short fiction collection sort of thing. But the first thing I finished was an actual book, and that was The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry. Now, you have probably heard of this book if you watch some booktube, because it's been making its rounds, especially I think last year. It got a lot of hype, a lot of people were talking about it, saying a lot of positive things. It's a historical fiction novel about a woman in the Victorian period who just recently became a widow. She's actually from London, but she goes to Essex, to a rural area there, and the local population has this kind of folk tale of the Essex Serpent, which is supposed to be this horrible monster which they think has now returned after a couple of 100 years of not being there. And she comes there because she's very interested in like archaeology and she wants to try and find stuff there. And unfortunately I did not love it, so I was a bit disappointed after having seen so many people just raving about it. So I listened to this on audio, and I would not suggest getting the audiobook because the narrator speaks so slowly that if you listen to it at normal speed you're gonna fall asleep. I usually always listen to my audiobooks at normal speed because I don't like having the narrator speak too fast, I want to enjoy it. But this one I listened to on 1.25, sometimes even on 1.5 times the normal speed because I couldn't deal with how slow this narrator was speaking, so I wouldn't really recommend the audiobook. I also wouldn't really recommend the book itself. I didn't hate it, I didn't think it was bad, I just didn't particularly enjoy it. I don't know enough about the Victorian period to pass any judgments about how realistic all the characters were in that time period, but I did think that the main character, whose name is Cora, I think she seemed a bit too much like a 21st century's wish of a strong, empowered woman in the 19th century, but it seemed unrealistic to me. I don't know, maybe there were women like that, but I didn't really buy into it. I don't know. There was also this ridiculously unnecessary love subplot, almost a love triangle kind of deal. Wasn't really into that. At the beginning I thought there were some things that were actually quite interesting. Now Cora is really interested in archaeology, and she and some of the other characters, they have conversations about the theory of evolution, which apparently when this novel is set has not been out for very long, so they're discussing that, and I thought that was fascinating, and I would have loved to have had more of that, but for the most part it didn't really feel like the fact that it was set in the 19th century did much for the story. Obviously the circumstances that the characters lived in were different than they would have been in a 21st century story, but a lot of the characters and the way they acted didn't really seem like they were very much different from characters you might find in modern novels, so I thought that was a bit of a letdown. So yeah, I thought this was an alright book. I think I'm talking very negatively about it. I didn't hate it, I thought it was okay, but I wouldn't have been sad never having had read this book. I didn't really get the hype, but I know that a lot of people loved it, so yeah, I don't know, it wasn't for me. The next thing that I finished was sort of a short fiction collection, I would call it, by Kafka, from this huge collection of everything he ever wrote that I own. And it's the first thing that he ever published. I'm going to put this down because it's huge and heavy. And the German title of that is Betrachtung, which actually kind of means observation, but I think in the English translation it's published as contemplation or something. So not exactly a translation of the word as I would have done it, but maybe, I don't know, maybe there is a use of word Betrachtung that I wouldn't even use, who knows. Anyways, it's a collection of a couple of I wouldn't even call them short stories because they're much shorter. They are really small glimpses into a character's life. Very often they start off and they almost build up a certain tension, and the end is extremely anticlimactic, but in a way that I really enjoyed it actually. It's interesting reading this because I'm going to be reading everything that Kafka ever wrote. This is very early on, and you can tell because I have read other stuff by him, and it gets weirder and it also gets better. So I enjoyed this, but I think if you're not into Kafka already, I wouldn't necessarily say that this is a place to start, but I thought it was enjoyable and interesting for what it was, definitely. The next thing that I finished is a book that I think I started in October or November, so I have been reading this book for quite a while. And that is A History of the World in 100 Objects by Neil MacGregor. So as the title says, you have 100 objects, they are all from the British Museum, and Neil MacGregor kind of tried to do the impossible and try to show a history of mankind, basically. It's not a history of the world, it's a history of humanity. So the title is a bit misleading. What kind of also bothered me just by the packaging of the book, the title is A History of the World, not The History, because you cannot write The History of the World. But on the back of the book it says, "This landmark history tells the story of the world and our place in it in an entirely new way." And I was just like, did you read the title? Yeah, so that's just a minor thing, but things like that kind of bother me. Yeah, but basically you have 100 objects. They are all from the British Museum. There is definitely something to be said about why is all this shit from all over the world in the fucking British Museum? Like, why is it still there? Can't you, like, give it back to the people it belongs to? But that's a whole different video, isn't it? With some of the chapters, he actually got me interested in things I thought I would never be interested in. Especially the very, very first chapters about, like, very early humans. When I'm in a museum, I usually skip the early history stuff because it's just like, this stone looks like the exact same like this other stone, and this pot looks exactly the same as this other pot. It's very uninteresting to me in a museum, but he actually made this interesting to me. And then he kind of moves through history, looks at different ancient civilizations up until modern time. I think with a lot of the chapters it worked really well, trying to show a history of humanity. But I think what annoyed me in a couple of chapters was when he talked about places somewhere on this planet that are not the UK or Britain or whatever. I think the story he told, because you only have about 4 or 5 pages, the story he told in some of those chapters were very focused on its connection to the history of Britain. And I mean, obviously he is from the British Museum, done in collaboration or something with the BBC, so of course he's somehow writing for a British audience, but I thought that that was kind of a missed opportunity. But overall, really interesting. And as I said, it got me interested in a lot of things that I did not know I was interested in before. Also one thing, especially when he talks about like very early history or like prehistory or however it's actually called, one thing that he did that I really appreciated was that he said, you know, these very early humans, they weren't less or like significantly less sophisticated than we are now. We just have like other stuff that we're building upon, but they were actually really smart. And he gives you examples, or he shows that with the objects he's talking about. If this sounds interesting to you, but you don't know if you want to read the book, because it's something about 550 pages, so it's not a thin book. If you're not sure if you want to commit to this book, there is a podcast, which I think was actually released before the book. So you could check that out, listen to it, and see if it's something that would interest you, because the podcast episodes are really close to the book. So that's definitely an alternative if you're not sure if you want to buy the book. My camera battery is flashing again. We're just gonna have to go a bit faster. So the next book that I finished, I also listened to on audio. I just don't have the time to read a lot, like to sit down and read a lot, so I've been listening to some stuff. And that is Do Not Say We Have Nothing by Madeleine Tien. This is also a historical fiction novel, and this kind of reading like this and The Essex Serpent so close together, I think a type of historical fiction that I like is historical fiction that focuses on a particular historical period that involves a conflict, which I probably don't know much about, and then you experience that conflict through your characters. So because I also read half of A Yellow Sun as well as Human Acts this year, and both of them also, they are kind of, I mean, Human Acts is also a bit different, but they both have a historical event, and then you see the repercussions of that through the eyes of characters. And you have that with this one as well. And I think this is the type of historical fiction that I really enjoy, rather than just having a certain setting and then you have the characters and see what happens. That's not that interesting to me, I think. But yeah, so you have two timelines in this actually. You have the 90s, basically the early 90s in Canada, and you have the 60s, the late 60s in China. So the frame story is basically the 90s in Canada. You follow a young girl who's the narrator, and her father recently not just left her mother and her in the sense of they got divorced and he went back to China where he's actually from, but he actually committed suicide. So she lives with her mother. The mother is also an immigrant from China, although I think her mother was from Hong Kong. Her father was from mainland China, her mother was from Hong Kong. She has never been to China and only knows some very basic Mandarin, I think only a couple of words. And then the Tiananmen Square protests and massacre happens, and a young woman from China comes and stays with her and her mother. And then that's kind of that timeline, but the majority of the book you actually spend during the Chinese Cultural Revolution, so the late 60s basically, in mainland China, and you follow characters who are related to the narrator and the Canada timeline, as well as the young woman who comes and stays with her. So you experience parts of the Cultural Revolution through those characters, and then it kind of leads up to the Tiananmen Square protests. So I liked having someone who knows Chinese being able to read out the names and the places and all that in the way that it's pronounced. I like having that. Even if I don't understand it, I like having something like that. And if I would have read this myself, I would have been like, oh, I wish I knew how to pronounce this in my head the entire time. So I really liked just that part of it, of having it read out to me. Also, this book actually talks a lot about the Chinese language. So especially in the Canada timeline, the young girl who's the narrator, because she only knows like very tiny pieces of Mandarin, sometimes she will ask the young woman who's staying with them, like, do you mean this or that? Like, this meaning or that meaning of the word. And I love the way that also in the Cultural Revolution timeline, the characters speak and think about their own language. Really beautiful, really love that part of it. Also something that you get a lot, also again more in the Cultural Revolution timeline, is the characters talking about music and their love for music, and especially their love Bach, which I really liked that the narrator pronounced Bach correctly, because a lot of native English speakers say Bach, but he's called Bach with a sound in the end. So they listen to a lot of Bach. They also listen to some Russian composers who I'm gonna check out because it sounded so interesting, and through these characters who are so in love with the compositions of these musicians and composers, I got a very interesting insight into music that I sometimes listen to when I study, but I've never really sat down and thought, okay, I'm going to listen to this now, I'm going to take the time. So if you're interested in language, or if you love music, like classical music, this might be one for you. I loved it so much. Really beautiful book. Also the writing style was stunning, which in some situations where you experience horrible violence through these characters' eyes, it's like such a strange contrast, but because it's still written so beautifully, but it's so horrendous what you're actually reading, or in my case, listen to. I loved it. Can't really say anything negative about it, I think. I don't think so. But yeah, so would highly recommend if any of the things that I just said sound like they appeal to you. Okay, I'm really trying to run against my dying battery because my other one is also charging right now. The next thing I read was also from the Kafka collection. It was actually just a short story, and the German title was Das Urteil and the English title was The Judgment, I believe. If not, I'm going to put it on the screen. So it's a short story that basically you follow a young man called Georg, and it's mostly about Georg's relationship to his father, a really difficult relationship. It's only about like 12 pages long or something, but it was really, really interesting. And Kafka himself had a lot of problems with his father. It's written in a bit of a bizarre way, and some of the language he uses is a bit ambiguous, so really interesting, and it kind of shows what's to come. I'm excited to continue reading Kafka. So that was it for today. If you've read any of the books that I talked about in this video, do tell me what you thought of them. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!